Welcome to the extras of the 30-Minute Kiss podcast. Today we're covering Dressed to Kill, which we just reviewed in its entirety. I am Big Steve, alongside with my partner in crime, Doc. Doc, how are you doing this fine, dreary morning?
I'm doing great. Had my coffee. Should have enough energy to get through this. We
Good
can
deal.
do it.
We're talking Kiss, man. You don't need coffee for that. That gets everybody energized, right?
True. All
Well,
right.
Dressed to Kill.
We're doing Dress to Kill today, and let's start out because this was one of your sort of first views of the band.
Mhm.
So let's talk about album artwork.
It's fantastic. So this was it caught my attention. I remember this being in a pile of cassettes that my brother had, and I latched onto it for some reason when I was a kid, about 5 or 6 years old in the 80s. And he had a few of them, and so did my neighbor's brother. He had some too, but for some reason, the 3 album covers that just stick out from being a kid and the first time holding cassettes was "Lick It Up" by Kiss, "Crazy Nights," which came later, and "Dressed to Kill." And it was just shocked to see, like, what is this? And you get 4 guys in suits with makeup on, which I don't know if you know really what the concept was behind this, other than showing their sense of humor. Are you familiar with where the idea came from?
I don't think so.
The idea really was, you'll have to forgive me, it was a photographer or an artist that was working alongside of the band, and they were doing a photo shoot for Cream magazine, which was really popular at that time. And he was helping to design what was going to be a Kiss comic, and the idea was Kiss saves the world from John Denver. It was a bunch of kids that were supposed to go to a John Denver concert, and Kiss gets wind of it, and they just can't believe that, and they need to save the world by preventing them from the fans to go see John Denver. So the idea was that these are guys that are just in there every day, going to work in suits, and they go find a phone booth and then take it off, and they're Kiss underneath, and then they put on a concert and makes everybody goes to see Kiss instead of John Denver. And in essence, it saves the world, which is hysterical in my opinion. That was a comic, I think, that came out, and that's where this part of the session came from, was that was part of the innovation behind it.
It could have been a movie, really.
Seriously, I know that they've done, variations of that type of stuff, but, I don't know that they would get John Denver to necessarily have signed on back in those days.
Probably not, but that's a funny concept. I like it. Yeah. I mean, just the craziness of the makeup, and then the sort of straight edge look of the suits is cool, and the fact that it's black and white, gives it a little bit of sort of mystery, I guess. But they're smiling, and
isn't the other version? Forgive me now, because I am colorblind, but I can see some variations. I believe the cassette version that I had or remember seeing was completely monochromatic, black and white. But I feel like the CD version actually had color tones to it, because I want to say you could actually see like Gene's shoes, which were like the producer's wife's shoes, the clogs or whatever that he's wearing. You could actually see that there was a color. Am I wrong in that, or am I I might have to Google this after? But I thought there was some color to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember it being black and white, and I'm not looking at it right now, but I think the black and white, and I assume that the suits are basically black and white. Their makeup's black and white. It just seems to fit, and it's a neat cover. And then we talk about sort of the backstory of it, which I didn't know, and that's kind of funny with the, I'm picturing them sort of tearing these suits off and then having those big costumes underneath, which is, of course, not possible really, but yeah, the idea is pretty funny. And the comic book thing, if they did release a comic with that, I want to see it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look. What I remember reading about that. That's where that came from. And while we're talking about this, I had to pull up the picture of the album cover just so I was looking at it. And I can see it's got a little bit of color to it, because Gene's suit in particular, which is not only not his suit, I think it's, like I said, I think it was borrowed or whatever, but it's much lighter than the other 3. I can't tell you the color wise, and you can see, yeah, the shoes mostly I think look like they're white, but Gene's suit color with that really weird grin and the way he's standing, it makes me laugh. Again, I think that's probably what caught my attention as a kid, is Gene's got this, this really awkward look, while the other 3 guys are looking serious and kind of posing and all that. You've got just this weirdo, which kind of was the run of the mill for a lot of their photo or for their covers is Gene just I think of like Dynasty, where we'll talk about that later, but he's got this, like, his eyes are huge and he's showing his bottom teeth, and like the first thing your eye gravitates towards, right? He's
Yeah.
doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I imagine those photo shoots were pretty fun, just wandering around in New York City and wandering through, just going to work and seeing this group of guys just in these suits doing what they're doing. And most people at that point probably didn't know who they were.
Probably didn't even care. It's New York, like it's just another day in the streets there. They probably didn't even give it a second thought, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
they're going to work.
You never know. So
But-
this the album artwork, we agree, is awesome. You rated this album quite high.
I did.
And I rated it slightly lower than Hotter Than Hell. Not necessarily, in production value. It took a step up in that direction, but I don't know that I liked the songs as much.
Yeah, and that's, if you're into the, yes, early on, obviously we've talked about it, was the heavy metal Beatles was kind of what Gene mostly, but Gene and Paul had kind of initially designed their sound to be, which was a little peppier but still heavy at the same time. And that's very prominent on the first album. And like we talked about in our last podcast, it feels like Dressed to Kill is almost an extension of that first album. And I actually don't mind that, because I think it showcases a lot of their musical ability a little bit more. And it might just be my ears, but it allows you to hear there a little more harmonies. You're hearing different distinct guitar, harmony guitar work, and getting to hear Gene's bass, which I love listening when Gene actually plays bass. I love listening to it. And that was probably my biggest complaint on Hotter Than Hell, is I couldn't hear anything that stood out. On the first album, you can hear half the songs. He's got some really fun licks in there that stand out. On Dressed to Kill, you hear the same thing. You actually hear what they're doing. I think that's what it comes down to, is the fact that I can hear more, makes it more enjoyable. And it is a little bit of a lighter-hearted approach to music. And the album cover itself backs that up. Like, these guys take their shit seriously, but they also have a sense of humor about who they are and what they're presenting. I couldn't ask for more. Yeah.
As far as connection with the cover and the songs, I think it makes way more sense than Hotter Than Hell did. That point that you had just made about, being serious about their work, but yet having fun doing it. That makes a lot of sense. So, talking a little bit more about production value, you had said that Hotter Than Hell took a step back because you couldn't hear what each instrument was doing. So you feel that this was on par with the first album or better than the first album? What do you think?
I think it's a little bit of a step up from the first album, just in production quality wise. The first album sounded great. From an early 70s rock album. That's kind of what I would want. I think certain things are clearer, even more so on the third album. And they actually, I believe, had the president of Casablanca, I believe Neil, was the one who produced the third album. So that was more an attempt to save money, because they couldn't. So the first album sold something like 60,000 initially. Second album, Hotter Than Hell, sold 80,000. The third one sold 150. So they were moving in the right direction, but I don't think they were moving quite as fast as they wanted to. And so they recognized that and felt the need to, where can we save some costs? And actually having, the president of the company, who was into music, produce the album. For my money, he seemed to have done okay, because I think it is a little bit of a step up. It's a little clearer, across the board in all of those songs. But again, it also, if you're going to be going in a darker direction or in a heavier direction, then it is considered a misstep. It is considered a step back, which I think that's, you can make the case both ways. Why our two visions of this, or our two, thoughts on this are kind of different, because if you liked Hotter Than Hell, you're not going to like a follow up to the first album and more of that happy sound. So.
Yeah. And you had mentioned in the last extras, you had posed the question, what if they would have done Dressed to Kill second? So what if they would have? What if they would have done Dressed to Kill second? What if the production value was worse? Because at that point they were still rushing. So there's a question there. And are we talking the production value that it has currently, or are we talking same situation, just different songs and different artwork for the second album?
Mhm. It would have made it interesting because if they followed the same template, but so basically had released Dress to Kill second, but had to do it in the compressed format, I think that would have been really confusing. I think that would have taken a major step back. But on the flip side, then you're giving the opportunity for Hotter Than Hell, which is establishing more of their. They had a little. I don't know. I guess I can't say that. I know that a lot of the material for Dress to Kill was, I think, recycled material. I believe it was stuff because they again had to get in there. So I think they used some Wicked Lester stuff and wrote some new, obviously, but did it quickly. So it would have been interesting to hear if Neil had produced Hotter Than Hell as the third album and what that could have done for those heavier songs if you could actually create a better balance sonically. I don't know. We'll never know, right?
Yeah, we will never know. It's an interesting thought. I mean,
because here's the thing: is when they re-recorded, they re-released. I believe it was with Sonic Boom. They did a Kiss Classics album where they re-recorded like 12 or 13, 14 tracks of some of their old ones, new in studio, right? And there's a couple of Hotter Than Hell tracks on there. I think Hotter Than Hell, I want to say maybe Got to Choose. I can't remember. It's been a long time, but I just know wow, obviously it's not Ace and Peter, and Gene and Paul are 30, 40 years older when they're doing this, but the production and hearing these, oh my God, this sounds good. And then you think of Unplugged, right? Got to Choose and Coming Home, other songs off of Hotter Than Hell, and how amazing those sound when you can actually hear the differentiating parts. It's oh God, if we could only have achieved that when they initially released it, what could have been with that? Because there's good material on there.
I agree. It's an interesting perspective. So let's talk Dress to Kill as far as drumming goes. So you had said basically Peter was doing the same thing between the first and second albums. Did he take any sort of step forward, backward, whatever on the third album? Did anything jump out at you as far as increased skills or different things that he would use as he learned over the first couple albums? Did he add anything?
I don't think it's noticeably different. I don't think you really get into him really branching out until you get to Destroyer, when he, completely, admittedly, I mean, he got so far into it that he had to get treatment, because he was so lost in reality, because he was so locked into this music and probably other substances as well. So I think Dress to Kill is more in the vein of the first album. It's rudimentary in a lot of the classic fills that he's using. But you can hear it compared to Hotter Than Hell. But I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that he doesn't really stray too far away. Hotter Than Hell, he was starting to, I think I mentioned that during our extras, Strange Ways was a very slow, deliberate, heavy song, which is a departure from their first three albums. And you could, and he liked it, but drumming wise, it's a totally different style for him. So I feel like he called on that style when they got into Destroyer, because there is a lot more heavy, heavy, just really heavy, deliberate drumming that goes on in there. Now, comparatively, we talked about the bass tones changing from the first to the second. So here's where, for you had a moderate rating of the first album. It was good, right? Hotter Than Hell, you were up a little bit on there, even though you couldn't really, it's the compressed tones in there. Then you get into these, again, happier rock songs, but you can hear a little more of Gene's bass playing. So what, from a bass player standpoint, stands out to you between these first three albums by the time you get to Dress to Kill? What do you latch onto? What do you not like? What do you like about the overall quality, tone, and ability that Gene brings on these records?
As far as ability, I don't question his ability. He is a good bass player, and I think a lot of bass players will dismiss him just as a lot of drummers will dismiss Peter. They're not virtuosos. They're just not. None of the band members are. They're just kind of street guys who knew sort of how to play their instruments, and they decided, we're going to make this band. It's not going to necessarily be about the music. It's going to be about the whole package. So, but I think Gene is a very good bass player. He's probably slightly underrated because people don't really like him. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably like him enough to at least be a fan, but if you ask the general public, he's kind of a self-centered, big ego.
If you ask him, he will tell you that too.
Right, right. So yeah, without going too far into that, I believe I've spoke just briefly about the fact that he was playing Gibson basses in the early days in the 70s, and I'm not a huge Gibson fan. I'm not a Gibson hater, but Gibsons tend to have a bit of a muddy tone, especially the earlier ones. And I think that, he wasn't, and maybe it was a production thing, but they could have made it more punchy sounding just to stand out slightly, but it just sits back there for the most part. But he does these little lines, some of the walking bass stuff and all that, which makes it stand out. But tone wise, I'm not a fan. I'm not a like a brand hater or whatever. I've owned over 30 basses over the years, and basically every brand out there I've played or listened to or whatever. So I'm not a hater. Yeah, basically I have seen it all and heard them all. I'm just I've never been a big fan of Gibsons. I've had 2 of them and I didn't like either one of them. Honestly, it just wasn't my flavor. If you were to look, if I were to promote and somebody said, okay, what brand would you promote? If somebody wanted to sign me, I'd say Ibanez in a second.
Was just about to ask if you could go back and if you could tell Gene what to play, what you would want to hear, right? And he would do it. You're the producer. Like, we're going to change it. In that era, what would it be? Would it be Ibanez even back then? Was Ibanez a prominent thing like that?
Well, no, they were around, but they weren't prominent in the U.S. So, Paul, later in his years in the late 70s and 80s and even into the reunion tour had an Ibanez contract. So, Gene, I don't think had a contract with Gibson at the time. He just preferred them. And he actually had a couple of basses made for him by LeBeau, a luthier, and Spector. And I think that was kind of just about the time that Alive came out. So probably not at this point, but if I was the producer, I don't know that I'd change the bass or the bass playing or anything. I would just try to change the tone a little bit. A little more mid-range, a little more treble, so it wasn't so muddy, I guess, and so it would stand out just a little more. And when you add a little bit of punch to a bass tone, it tends to give it a little bit of a heavier sound anyway, which seems counterintuitive because if you're adding high end and taking out a little bit of low end, it doesn't seem like it would be heavier, but it gives it more of a presence, which makes the overall mix sound heavier.
Sure.
That's really, that's a lot of babbling for a...
No, it makes sense because I mean, for all intents and purposes on Dressed to Kill, again, you can hear Gene's bass, but it doesn't sound remarkable enough to make it sound enough low end, to fill that bottom part. It sounds like almost, I don't want to say it sounds like a third guitar, but in some ways that's kind of what I associate it with. There's nothing that complements, but then again, Peter's drumming wasn't, he wasn't using, heavier bass drums on it, which wasn't, again, the sound they were trying to create. And so that, I guess that makes sense. I mean, what would that sound like with a deeper lower end bass to give it the juiciness, but you also don't have drums as the other half of that rhythm section to back it up. I don't know. Again, it's fun to speculate on how that could have changed that, the presentation of the album.
For sure. And so because the drummers changed in the 80s a couple of times, the drum sound changes, and we'll get to significantly, and with each drummer sort of changes, but Gene has been there all along. So I'm looking forward to the 80s for bass purposes, because he played about 20 different basses during that period. And you can see it on concerts. He plays tons of different stuff, and we'll talk about it. But I'm excited about that because I nerd out and I watch them and I go, oh my gosh, that's this and that's this. So
Yeah.
and so we'll get more into sort of the difference between Peter, Eric, the
Yeah.
Eric crew, and just kind of how those all sort of changed the whole presence of the band, because it did. Definitely did. And as they were switching lead guitar players a little bit in the 80s, that changed the whole presence of the band too. So looking forward to that.
Yeah. I want to back up one thing when you were talking about Pete's drumming on this too. So just kind of my last thought just overall with that is he did, I would say a lot of people point at, they talk about his solo on Alive. They talk about his drumming on God of Thunder, which, I mean, there's no question. We'll talk about that when we come across that. He's bringing something completely different to it. But generally speaking, I think on Dress to Kill, Lover All I Can is from end to end his best drumming. I think that is not, because that is not an easy. He's got a flair with that cowbell and the off beats with the snare and the bass drum, keeping that time on a very quirky song. Because Lover All I Can is another one I didn't learn to really appreciate until I got older. The more I listened to it and being a drummer and thinking through, like, how do you differentiate from kind of the straight 4/4 time that you're kind of known for with some fun little old school fills to something like that, and to keep it that way and not have it, like this is before the days of, computers can go in and change that and sampling and all that. This is just straight quality drumming. I think that is the best drumming that he's done on a Kiss song is Lover All I Can. So I do want to say that is one standout on this compared to the previous two that was different. So
are you talking like the entire time Peter was with the band, that song is his best drumming?
I think so. I think technically speaking, I think it is. I think he plays more from feel. He's admittedly like he doesn't really think in the terms of rudiments, and he doesn't think in time signatures, anything like that. Like the band holistically, a lot of them really didn't. They had to go back to school when it came to Destroyer, and Bob Ezrin is like, do you know what 4/4 is? And Peter's just got this glazed look, and like he knows it, but he doesn't know that he knows it. And so he's he plays things based on feel, and I listened to how that song plays itself, and he probably could have done his 4/4 time over that and it would have worked. The song would have been okay. It would have made it virtually like every other song on Dress to Kill. But by getting that groove and kind of feeling what Paul is driving in that, he changes it dramatically. And I think, I still stand by that. I think that's probably his best drumming on any of the Kiss records that he plays on. There are some other really good ones we'll talk about, but that one's probably the top for me.
I'm going to re-listen to that one again. Just
re-listen to it again. Yes.
Re-listen to it again. Re-listen to it. Yeah. All right. Well, we're approaching our time here.
Yeah. But that was good. I like talking Dress to Kill. That's one
of my top. Was one of your top albums. And you rated it quite high. So next time it may be a little bit longer because we will be talking about Alive.
A lot happening there.
A lot. Yeah. Lots of controversy, and we can get into some of that, but we won't dive too deep into the controversial part of it. We will just give some extra thoughts on it. Yep. All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we appreciate it. And we'll see you next time with Extras Alive.